Thank you so much for being here. Again, my name is Dan Seydel, and I am just so pleased to have you here today. As you can tell, we are completely digital, so this session will be on YouTube, on our EIW Contractor University, as well as Hoffman University, and we look forward to having you visit that site, because if there's any material that you were unable to capture today, you have that benefit of being able to view it and sharing it with your friends. Today the subject is bidding, and many of you have had a lot of experience estimating in the construction environment. And what we found is sometimes there can be quite a few challenges in being competitive and being able to address the needs of the various stakeholders, whether it be the owner. In this case, you can see it's a pretty sizable project featuring Sound Transit Roosevelt Station. And then sometimes you're actually working with other contractors that are working for the prime. And so it creates a little unique environment for you to become familiar with. And so this class is really designed to provide some introduction to some of those relationships, as well as to expose you to the opportunities with this project. And as many of you have participated in the blueprint reading class featuring this project, we also had estimating in the GCCM environment class that this gentleman, Chris Bjork, who we're so lucky to have here with us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our instructors, and I'm going to let them take over. Chris Bjork is a chief estimator with Hoffman Construction, and as you well know, they have been a catalyst for the Entrepreneurial Institute of Washington. And they have been so positive in creating opportunities to expose our firms to projects early on, as well as to provide some of the technical understanding and exposure to some of the skills as well as the tools that they're using in their everyday business. And so we're so thankful to have Chris Bjork here today. Let's give him a round of applause. Also here today, we have one of the most successful mechanical contractors in the country. You've heard about him for years. When Obama comes to town, you see him hooping it up in their private basketball court. And we're really happy to have Adam Myers with McKinstry here, giving his time and energy and trying to create an opportunity for us to learn and expand and hopefully create some matching relationships. Let's hear it for Adam. And finally, this handsome gentleman right next to him is representing Vecca Electric, and a real seasoned veteran in the field of construction and electrical. And I'm really excited to hear his presentation. Let's hear it from Mike. And you know my ugly mug, so I'm Dan Seydel. I'm the owner of Platinum Group. We are an inclusion specialist, and we are very happy to be here today. Our agenda is as follows. We've done our introductions. I'm going to go over some objectives as well as introduce you to EIW if you haven't been already introduced to us. And then I'm going to go over the workshop objectives and get out of your way and let these great people lead this presentation. I am going to encourage you, if you have ideas, if you have thoughts, if someone has said something that resonates with a project that you're working on now, or a project that we're going to be talking about, make sure you use this as an opportunity to engage these great subject matter experts. These are the best that this state has to offer, and I'm so grateful that they have volunteered their time and energy to us. I mentioned to you that EIW has a YouTube station. Here it is. So if any of you have any difficulties finding us, here's the link. When you go to YouTube, you'll get all that great information. As you can tell, we're trying to be very proactive. So in doing this, our workshop objectives are to develop best practices. In every class we have, we want to make sure that we're addressing the best practices of the industry and your sector so you can be more competitive. And so that's a really primary function for us. The other item is to make sure that we provide an overview of the subject. And in this case, we're talking about proposal development. We're also providing bidding insight from these experts that are working on mega projects, if not in the hundreds of millions, sometimes in the billions. So these are folks that work with a lot of commas, and they know how to reduce risk, and they know how to be proactive in scheduling and identifying production levels as well as resourcing. So we are so fortunate to have them here. We also have these very seasoned subcontracting experts that can give us some expertise. And some of you may not necessarily work in the mechanical and electrical area, but you'll be pleased to know that a lot of times there are opportunities in their sector where other trades could get engaged. And I'll use an example of finishing of sheet metal. So there's opportunities, or excavation and trenching for electrical. So be mindful of those opportunities, and sometimes they're not as obvious as they may appear. So know the supply chain, and if you're unfamiliar with it, come to us and we'll be sure to share it with you. The other thing is we want to make sure that we clarify the differences between the first tier and the second tier bidding process. And we want to also list current opportunities, not only with Hoffman, but also with McKinstry and Vecca. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome Chris Bjork. Thank you so much.
Okay, so moving on the way we've kind of organized this class. So first we're going to talk about if you are bidding direct to a GCCM. So you are a prime contractor bidding directly to a GCCM. We're going to go into a lot of detail on that. And then we're going to take a break, get some food. I think Dan's ordered some barbecue. It's a good thing. Then we're going to come back and talk about what those differences are if you are a lower tier, if you're a second or third tier bidding on GCCM work, and some specifics about mechanical and electrical bidding, and then go into some upcoming opportunities for projects that are coming up, and wrap it up with some of the next steps. And I want to reiterate something that Dan said. If you have a question, feel free to interrupt me and ask the question. I've got the slides here, so if I won't lose my spot, but I would love to make sure that you get your questions answered, and don't forget the questions because you're waiting till the end. So moving forward, first steps on looking at any project is to know your project. Is it the right scope? You want to make sure that you're bidding the right work that you want, that you're capable of doing. Is it the right size? Most of these projects do have bonding requirements. You don't want to go get a job and then it be too large for you to go out there and then perform on. And is it the right timing? Most of our bid packages have schedules with them. So you want to look at the timing of how the project fits in with the work that you have currently going on to make sure that you have the right labor pools and you can move people from job to job and keep that good flow of work. Ways that we can look for what the right scope is we do a pretty detailed bid package. So we'll highlight here whatever's in that bid package. For instance, this is miscellaneous metals. It gives you a listing of all the different spec sections that apply to that bid package. We then get further into some very detailed clarifications about what that scope is. So if you see things in there that I need to include this, but I don't feel comfortable doing it, you can make that decision on whether you need to can proceed as a first tier, or maybe you want to look at maybe bidding as a second tier and a lower tier to one of the other primes. Because one thing about the bid packages is that when you're bidding as a prime, whatever's in that bid scope of work, you have to include. So there's no opportunity to exclude something. If you exclude something, that will nullify your bid. And so that's a really important distinction to make as you start looking at the bid scopes. If we haven't told you that you can exclude, that there's an exclusion in it, you have to include it. If you're bidding, now this is just if you're bidding as a prime direct to a GCCM. So that means you're filling out the bid form, you're turning it in there. If you are bidding to a prime, so say if you're bidding on concrete work, but you're not bidding the whole job, you're just bidding, say, the rebar on it. Well, that rebar bids to the concrete prime. So that as a rebar guy, you can exclude you can clarify your bid however you feel you want to. And then we'll get into that a little bit later on what those differences are. But as a prime subcontractor bidding on the GCCM project, in the bid documents, it will tell you specifically you do not get to clarify your bid. So when you turn in that number is all-inclusive of the scope that's been outlined for it. Or it needs to be, certainly. Well, yes, if there's addendums, that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions during the bidding process. So if you see something in that scope of work that causes some alarms, like, hey, this isn't normal. This type of testing that we're supposed to do, I've never seen this before. Is this right? Or what are the implications on doing this? Can we have somebody else do this? You can ask a question. You can ask a question to see if that scope can be removed from the project or maybe assigned to a different contractor or a different bid package. That is perfectly acceptable to do, and there may be an addendum issued that clarifies the scope. Or if there's a scope that's unclear, there's a line in the specification that you're not quite sure, it's pretty ambiguous, you don't know quite what it means, you need some clarification on it, that's an idea where you start asking a question, a technical question, and we get some response, some clarification to make sure that you can get the right number into your bid. No. So if you are bidding to a prime subcontractor, not to Hoffman directly, you do not need to send your bid to Hoffman. You want to send it to whoever that prime is. Right, and there's a number of ways you can do that too. If you go to the pre-bids, we'll issue as an addendum the sign-in sheet from the pre-bid, so you'll be able to see who all was there. And that's a good way of finding some of those prime subcontractors. If we have the drawings posted on Builders Exchange, you can go in and look and see who's downloaded the projects. If nothing else, you can call us, either myself or our purchasing manager, and we can see what prime bids we know of, at least. It is illegal to do that with two exceptions in traditional GCCM. The two exceptions are mechanical and electrical, which is why we have these gentlemen over here. There's a provision in the RCWs that allows for mechanical and electrical contractors, if each value of the scope of work is over $3 million, that you can procure those contractors early using a similar method on how you procure a GCCM contractor. So there's a qualifications, a book, there's an interview, and then there's a fee and general conditions proposal, and each part of those get a certain amount of points, and then at the end of the day, whoever has the most points is awarded the job. And then they are brought on early and work through pre-construction in the same manner that we as a GCCM work through the pre-construction as the design progresses to develop those scopes and develop the packages. But if they are not self-performing any work, they too also have to bid out their work. As a GCCM, we have to bid out all scopes of work, all the other scopes of work. So even though, say, Hoffman, we self-perform concrete work. That concrete work on N150, I have to put together a bid, I have to submit that bid, and I need to be the low bidder in order for us to self-perform that work. those are how the RCWs work for traditional GCCM. So next thing on these first steps is to read the bid package. Bid time and location. Those are really important. Because bid time is important because you don't want to necessarily have two jobs bidding at the same time. I've known contractors who have done it and pulled it off, but it's pretty challenging. So the other thing is, where do you need to turn it in? And here this is an example. Most of what I'm showing you is from our drafts for the N150 project for the bid scope. So ignore the dates because the dates aren't right, but we put nice bold when it bids. You look inside the bid package and you can see here for this bid package it says that the proposal form needs to be delivered, sealed to Hoffman Construction and has our address for our office there. Where you want to be careful for is you want to read and verify. So that was for all bid packages except concrete. Concrete, if you look at where it needs to be turned in at the Sound Transit offices. So you want to be careful about where the bids are being turned in because certain bids may not get turned into the general contractor's office. A client may want that bid turned into, say, the Capital Projects office at University of Washington, or Sound Transit's office, or City of Seattle's offices. Especially, without exception, any bid where the GCCM is going to be submitting a self-performed bid on it. Every client will make sure that that bid is not turned in at the general contractor's office because that just creates a situation where you've got the general contractor bidding there, and that doesn't sit right with anybody. It doesn't sit right with me as a general contractor, and it certainly doesn't sit right with anybody else who's trying to bid. If a GCCM is going to submit a self-performed bid, they have to advertise in the bid package that they are going to be bidding as a self-performed entity to make sure that people are aware of that. When you see the package, it can be a little intimidating because it's got the full contract in it and it's got a lot of information in it. But one of the reasons why we put together all that information is to really take out a lot of the guesswork. We try to write a really detailed bid scope so you really know when you're looking at details what to include and what not to include. What all do I need to be aware of so that, what provisions do I need to be aware of? What requirements are on the project so that it's clear. So when you put together a bid and prepare that bid, you know exactly what you need to include and what you don't need to include. So in accordance and along that line, it's important to know, the time, but how the bids are received. Bids must be submitted in a sealed envelope, complete and clearly labeled. Faxed bids will not be accepted. So if you look at the bid package and it tells you to put it in a signed, sealed envelope, don't call up the day of the bid and say, where do I fax this into? Or can I email you my bid? And I've had this happen before, and I can't do anything at that point. I can't, at that point, it's almost too late for you to even get all the materials together, get it sealed, and then get to our office. So read that because it's a really simple thing, but it can make or break whether the bid's accepted or not. And then start looking at the bid requirements. Things like a bid bond. If the amount of your bid exceeds $300,000, by RCW you need a bid bond or a cashier's check, one of the two. If your bid's under $300,000, then you don't need a bid bond. But for instance, on Sound Transits, on these stations, there's things like FTA provisions. It's Buy America Act. These are things that you need to understand to make sure that you provide a good bid. If it's an OSA, an owner-controlled insurance program, which means that they are taking out a policy for everyone for the general liability insurance. So you don't have to include that in your bid. And it's an important thing. You had a question? It's in 5% of the bid amount. So whether it's a cashier's check or whether it's a bid bond, and usually when you get the bid bond, it just says good for 5% of the bid 5% of the bid amount. It actually doesn't actually have an amount in there. You have to tell your bonding company what your projected amount is, but usually you don't know what the actual amount is until 30 minutes before the bid's due. Well, for GCCM projects, you need to, you can turn it in person, and then we'll have a public opening. So if you want to know where your bid came in at, it's certainly advisable to turn it in person and then wait for the bid opening and wait through the bid opening, and then you can find out how you did. If that's not going to work, certainly sometimes people bid on the project, they're not local. They're on a project that it's maybe it's just a supply thing. It's precast supply, precast wall panels or precast stairs or stair tread supply. And maybe they're in Vancouver or they're in Eastern Washington. They may actually mail in the bid and make sure that it gets there in time so that we can stamp it, and then they'll find out when the bid results are posted. So if you were bidding on something that, say, is not local, then you may not necessarily go over there directly. But if it's something where you're going to be getting numbers to the last second, like a lot of bids go, then you're going to want to have somebody over close to where the bid's turned in so that you can call in what that final number is, so they can write it down and go seal everything up and go get the envelope stamped get the date and time stamp on it so that it's verification that that bid was turned in before the bid time. Yeah, you definitely always make sure that you see that timestamp, or you get a receipt or something that says, I turned this bid in before it was due, because that's your ticket so that you know that you are responsive as far as the time. Then getting into those detailed bid scopes, read through all those specific languages so you know what's in and what's not out. We'll have it really in two spots. For each bid package, we'll have a listing of the specifications and clarifications. We'll also have a section of general clarifications that apply to all bidders. We'll go through a little bit more of that detail right now. This is for the gypsum board system, so drywall. If you read through the specs, there's certainly more than drywall that's in this bid. There's things like fire stopping and plastering, resilient base. Because there's just a little bit of resilient base in there, we've got the resilient base in with the drywall contract. Rubber base. This stuff right over here. So we're talking the fire caulking around penetrations through rated partitions, or the fire stopping possibly at the head of rated walls. Those kind of things are sometimes in the drywall bid scope. Sometimes they're split up. So we're talking the fire caulking around penetrations through rated partitions, or the fire stopping possibly at the head of rated walls. Those kind of things are sometimes in the drywall bid scope. Sometimes they're split up. So that's one of those things where you really need to read through the specs to know what that entire scope of work is, because we may say that, hey, if you're the fire stopping for electrical penetrations, the electrician needs to handle because they know where they're going to be. Mechanical penetrations, the mechanical fire stopping needs to be handled by the mechanical contractor. But anything else, and anything at the top of the rated wall heads, that needs to be taken by the drywall contractor. So that's why it's important to read through those detailed scopes. As Hoffman, we tend to put caulking in with the scope that it goes with. So caulking around, say, window frames, we would want the window subcontractor to do. If it's just general caulking around, caulking drywall, or maybe some of the caulking around that's clearly marked, we may have a drywall contractor do some of that work. But it's very dependent on what that scope of the work and how the drawings are laid out. We try to make things in our bid packages make as much sense as possible, both from as a general contractor and making sure the people responsible for things have that ownership of it, and from a subcontracting perspective, because we don't want to necessarily make a bunch of subcontractors who are not used to being general contractors. So we try to walk that fine line between how much goes into a bid package and what makes sense to have somebody else do and take responsibility. You may have, it varies from job to job, but you may have it either way. I've seen it both ways, where we have had 4 or 5 different fire stopping contractors on a job, and where we've had just one, where we've pulled it all out and said, hey, there's enough fire caulking and fire stopping on this where it makes sense to do this. It's the same thing with regular caulking too. I mean, on a brick building sometimes, or a tilt panel job that has caulking in the tilt panels, and then you've got caulking in your brick joints. If that's the majority of the caulking on the job, sometimes we'll pull it out and have a caulking bid package. It just depends on what makes most sense for the job. We try to tailor each job specific to that job. Right. And that's why we try in these bid packages to be really specific about things like that, to make sure that it's clear to you as a bidder, regardless of, just until you know whether it's in or it's out, so that you can make sure that your bid is correct. Right, and then the PLAs those are, and N150, all the sound transit work does have a PLA, so that is something that you really need to work through and read through the PLA to see who does what scopes too, because it may not be apparent necessarily, who does it. And this happened to me when I was estimating early on U250, the UW light rail station that's recently opened. We had a bunch of temporary bracing down in the base to brace the slurry walls, and it's all steel bracing. And thinking, hey, that's got to be an ironworker's job, and there's enough tonnage on that. Now I'm looking at being able to get your FOTS and your Canrons and your big steel fabricators interested in this project because there's enough tonnage there. Turns out that because it's temporary bracing, the shoring contractors claim it. So now all the steel on the projects goes into miscellaneous metal contractors, which there's a price difference in your fabrication and your installation between throwing up big steel and throwing up small steel. So that was one of those things that we caught and dealt with during the course of estimating it. But it was, it's one of those PLA things that you have to be careful on, who claims what scopes. oftentimes in the concrete bid package, we will include grouting the door frames because we know that the laborers claim that, and you might as well have your concrete sub do that work because it's quantifiable. They're going to have to do it anyway, and that way you don't have somebody get bitten by it after the fact. So other things with like this package. So inside the drywall is also the fireproofing. So fireproofing is in charge of that. It'll include things like this, which says include an allowance of $10,000 for repair and patching of fire-resistant materials. So if there's existing fireproofing that we know, or the fireproofing that gets put on, we know it's going to get damaged at some point. So we want you to put in $10,000 in your bid to deal with the first $10,000 at least, or up to $10,000 of any repair work that you need to go back. And we want you to have that in the bid so there's not any arguing about it after the fact. And we don't have to worry about getting any approvals or something. It's in your bid, and we can go have you just jump in and get to it because you have that money there. Sometimes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Something like on this, I don't think that this necessarily would be on the bid form as an allowance. So this says that include an allowance of $10,000 for repair and patching of fire-resistant materials, which will be formed on a time and materials basis at the direction of the GCCM.
Are you referring to MK5 monocoat?
Yeah, it would be a monocoat type material. So what this bid package will have is you'll have this document here, which is our bid scope. Then you will also have the bid specifications and the bidding documents, the plans. So there's really three groups of materials, and sometimes there's supplemental information. If on earthwork bids, there may be the geotechnical report. When it goes out, when the earthwork goes out, there would be a geotechnical report, or I think in the earthwork bid package, there would be like geotechnical monitoring. There are negotiated support services are a little bit different animal. So on negotiated support services, we as a GCCM can negotiate those directly. So this you wouldn't, we may bid out certain aspects of it, but it doesn't necessarily mean we don't have to bid that out because it's a negotiated support service. We have the RCWs allow a little bit more latitude in how we handle those. So we have some acoustical, we have some cement plastering. So it's like Pyrock 40 and Pyrock 20. It's over drywall, I believe. No, it's inside the station. Yeah. I'll have to double check on that. I know that both 20 and 40 were spec'd, and on N140 we have 40. I'm sure of that. But the stations are each a little bit different, so you'd have to. It is an expensive product. It's for sound attenuation. So it's inside the building because you have some areas in these stations that have some really, really big fans, and they're not quiet. And you want to around those shafts, you want to make sure that you attenuate some of that sound appropriately. So they're using it for some of that. Last thing in this is that we'll call out specific details. So this one says for the acoustical plastering, make sure you get detail 6 on AD 125. So that allows you to go open up the drawings and go to detail 6 on AD 125 and see how the cement plaster comes in here, and then the metal ceiling comes in and abuts to it, so that you can kind of look at how those details, focus in on how those details, and sometimes we'll call out specific types of things like, hey, if there's a closure angle up here that makes a lot more sense for, say, the plasterer to do, to put in that angle rather than a miscellaneous metals guy or a sheet metal guy. We may call out and say, hey, you have that closure angle because it makes more sense for you to have that in your bid, because I'm not trying to coordinate two guys into a small space. This is actually inside the building. So this is actually this is actually up in the head. This is in the head house. So this is inside the building. There's a CMU wall here. This is the roof of the head houses that go on top where the station entries are. So there's a lot of there's mechanical space and station entry on both ends of the station. There are soffits, yes. I don't know the full extent of all the soffitting, just because we're still in the process of getting the final drawings from Sound Transit, so I haven't quite seen all the extent. But there's usually either metal panel soffits or some exposed structure soffitting as well. Then here in the general clarifications, this is where we start clarifying things like policies and initiatives that we have. Like we have a Nothing Hits the Floor initiative, where it encourages people to get everything on carts so that everything's easily movable, and you don't ever run into a situation where you got to work in this spot and there's a pile of metal studs on a pallet right where you need to work. It would have to be up on something movable. So if you got to that situation, you could go there and wheel the cart out of your way, go get your work done, and not have to call and wait for someone to come get your work done. So it's an initiative that we've had a lot of success with, but it's something that you need to be aware of because it will be expected of you as a bidder when you go out to execute the work. But it's where we also talk about our fall protection requirements and progress cleanup requirements. We also talk about hoisting and what types of hoisting we will be providing as a GCCM, the tower crane, the specifications of the tower crane, what the reach of it is, what the capacity of it is, how much you should expect to be able to use it. For instance, if you're doing a concrete building and you have the tower crane there, we will let the concrete bidders know that they don't get full use of it. They should only expect 80% usage of it, because there's other trades that are going to be on site, and they need to be able to use the tower crane, and the concrete subcontractor can't dominate all the usage of it. Although we recognize that at that point they're going to be the main user of it, and they need to be expected to have enough usage of it to be productive. You would work through the specifics of that with the on-site superintendent and engineer on where exactly it is. That's something that we would coordinate as a team on what makes sense. But we're not trying to do anything that doesn't make sense. I mean, we're trying to make sure that things are clean. You've got great access, and you've got great efficiency, therefore, and great safety. We found that if you have great access on a project, your safety is going to be much better because there's no tripping hazards. I mean, a clean site is a safe site. So we try to make sure that our sites are very clean. We will have, typically on most projects, some job services, laborers or a carpenter that will work on maintaining some of the stuff that hand railing that we provide, or if we need to go build an access stair that's going to be used by all trades or something like that. For cleanup, typically we rely on the subcontractors to clean up their scope of work, and then we'll stipulate like having a composite cleanup crew. But in these, if I go back, in like this cleanup specification, it'll actually tell you what to plan for. So plan on a composite crew and figure 8 hours on a Friday, you're going to be one member. You're going to need to supply one laborer as part of a composite crew to clean the site, and it'll spell that out so that for two reasons. One, so that you know what to include on your bid, but also that everyone knows what to include in your bid so that everyone's on that same playing field to make sure that everyone's bidding the same scope of work. But it'll be spelled out what those requirements are in the bidding document. So then you get into part of the first step, how to handle questions. So inevitably in a bid process, you've got questions. Scope's not clear, you don't understand something in the contract. Well, we will specify specifically where technical questions go, where substitution requests go. If you've got a question on the commercial terms, so that's the contract, there are two different people you talk to there. So you must definitely read this. Questions need to be submitted in writing. It provides you documentation on what the question was asked, and then we will reply in writing so you have documentation of what the response was so that everybody's clear. But we also have to make sure that when questions are asked that every bidder gets the response to make sure that everybody is on that equal playing field and nobody has better information from us as a GCCM than somebody else, because that's just not right to give anyone either inadvertently or certainly not advertently a leg up. That's just not ethical to do. There may be an official question sheet. There certainly is an official substitution request form. Otherwise, you would need to submit them in email. So we've supplied emails for the people you need to send those to, or you can, certainly mail it in if you wanted to, or fax. I mean, however you get it in, as long as it's in writing, addressed to the right person, then we will collect all those and get an addendum, get answers, and supply them in an addendum what those answers are, so that everyone can make sure that they're bidding that same scope. The next steps after you've got to get all this, you're bidding on the project. Now you got to start preparing your bid. So first thing there is brought up earlier, pre-bid meeting. Go to the pre-bid meeting. You got to see the site. Do not ever bid on any job that you have not seen the site, because you need to look at that site and see where your access are, what's not shown on a plan. And there's a lot of times things like trees, power lines. When you get out to the site, they're way closer than they appear on the plans. So you need to know those things. You need to be able to look at it and say, how can I bring in work? How am I going to sequence this and really be able to visualize that? It's a very key thing in order to plan your work accordingly, because it goes directly into your productivity on how you think you can staff that project and where your advantages are to do the work. Then you've got to line up if you're bidding as a direct, you've got to line up your vendors and your lower tier subs. If I need a subcontractor or I need vendors, they need to know that you're bidding so that they get you the price. If you're a drywall contractor, you need to get the word out to all your metal stud guys, all your drywall vendors, so that you get the best pricing in and that you get the same pricing that everybody else is getting, so that when comes bid day, you're getting that bid streamlined and sharp, your pencil sharpened with the best pricing that you have available. And then you've got to line up the requirements and prepare your bid estimate. And that goes into things like, making sure you get your bid bond ordered. Don't wait to the last minute to get your bid bond ordered if you're ordering a bid bond. It's an added level of stress that you just don't want to have. And if you're calling up the same day, you're probably not going to get it. That's just a rule of thumb. But one of the things I wanted to take a little bit of time out for and kind of go through in the preparation of your bid estimate is going through the drawings. So that, because a big project like this, sometimes the way that the drawings are organized can be a little confusing. So I'm just going to go through the architectural drawings, but the same organization follows for the other disciplines. So in the general drawings, so the G series drawings, so they'll have like G09 and then this is the key thing, G7 200. That's this drawing. It's a key plan for these stations. So the stations are long enough where the whole station doesn't fit on one drawing to get all the information you need. So they've divided them up into three sets. And what this does, and I know it's small, so it's hard to, you can't read it, but it tells you what series, it tells you that this is always 201. So everything, this is basement level 2. So whenever you see 201, that's this end of the building. If it's 202, that's the centerpiece of the building. And 203 is this other end. So that goes for level 2 on every single discipline through the drawing so that you know where you're looking at, where your match lines are. Looking up for plan views, it's always a P. So in these last digits here, if it says AP or MP or SP, that means it's the plan view. For architecturals, if it has a C, the AC series of drawings, that's ceiling drawings. And they also have floor finish drawings, so AF drawings. Elevations are AEs. Yes, it can be, and especially with acoustical ceilings, because you really, it's one of those challenges that you have, and when I'm estimating it, I've run the same challenges, because not only do you have things here on the reflective ceiling plan, you've got the different ceiling types called out, and they'll have designations in here that says AC, ACT 5 or metal ceiling 3 or metal ceiling 4, but then you've also got to look at the finish schedule to make sure that that's coordinated too. And sometimes you got to look at the actual sections through stuff, because sometimes you end up, I've found that sometimes you get some hidden ceilings. Yes. Yeah, and that's something when if you see something like that, you can ask questions during the bidding process about sequence. What's your view of the sequence? If you get the job and it hasn't been ironed out, and you come across this, that's when your guys in the field sit down with Adam's guys in the field, and you work something out to make sure that everyone's productive, because nobody wants to be getting in each other's way. That makes two guys unproductive, and that's not what it's about. We want to be productive and efficient out in the field. So that's why we sit down, we talk, we work out you can bring in our superintendents and our engineers in that to make sure that everything makes sense, and we're going to build a quality project, and everyone's going to be efficient out there in the field. Well, my estimating team consists of probably anywhere from 3 to 6 people. And we're all looking at different scopes. So I don't have 6 guys looking at the drywall. I've got 1 guy looking at the drywall. Right, and that's part of what we do as a GCCM. Is part of our responsibility and the value we bring is we're working this pre-construction as design bids to try to iron out some of those issues ahead of time so that we can sequence things and we can tell you up front, hey, you know what? In fact, U250, we had to put one of the escalators in the building before the concrete work was done, because otherwise there was just no good way to get that escalator in the building. So we, as a concrete bidder, we had to plan on shoring around it. So it was something that was in the middle of down in the lower level, and we had to make sure that our shoring was designed to accommodate shoring around it and bridging around it so that we didn't damage it and we could still get our work done. But if you know that up front and plan that accordingly, then you've got a game plan going into your bid, you're covered, and you can really be efficient out there doing that work. It does. It does. And we do BIM on almost all of our projects, and that clash detection and just the visualization that it brings is, I use BIM doing my takeoffs, and I tell you what, if nothing else, even if it's a really preliminary model and I can't get a lot of data off of it, just being able to go in there and see what this building looks like and how it's really coming together is invaluable, absolutely invaluable. So elevations are E's, sections are X's. So they'll have lots of sections. They'll be called out on the plan view where those sections are. And then the D series drawings are all your details. There is a table of contents in the front too, because there's a lot of drawings on these projects. So what that is that it's to help you navigate so you're not thumbing through 3 volumes of drawings when you only need to be in 1 volume of drawings. So those are kind of like the brief on the general organization of the sound transit drawings. They're the same for all the projects. So it's kind of a standard that they have. Then the last thing, strategize, strategize, strategize. Once you've got that estimate done, you know what the scope of work is, you got to be thinking, where's my advantage? How am I going to get this work and work this plan the most efficient way so that I get the job? And that's something that's, every contractor and subcontractor looks at it differently, and it's something you have to look at yourself and really look at, okay, where are my efficiencies, where's my risk, and how do I mitigate some of that risk? And where's that sweet spot on making sure I protect myself on risk, but not protect myself so much that I protect myself out of a job. So that's something that we're challenged as a GCCM often, or if we're bidding work as a general contractor, it's a part of the bidding environment. So finding that bid strategy is very key. And then the final steps is bid day. Bid day, you want to know the bid form. So the bid forms, we try to keep our bid forms pretty straightforward and simple. Not a lot of breakouts, not a lot of line items. But if you're bidding something, say, a WashDOT project, heavy civil jobs tend to have lots of breakouts, lots of unit pricing. So you just need to be aware of that bid so you can set up your estimate so that on bid day, as you're getting all sorts of information at all sorts of different times, and you can know where everything plugs in. You can set that stuff up ahead of time so you run your bid efficiently. But it also it tells you what you need to turn in. Like here, the bid form and the bid bond, or in a form of a surety bond, a money order or cashier's check or certified check. Acknowledge your addenda, your contractor's license numbers. And this portion right here, this is really important. And it's all about dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Sign your bid form. I have seen experienced subcontractors be low on a bid, and they forgot to sign their bid form. And at that point, there's nothing I can do. It's a requirement that you sign your bid form. So if you are sending someone over to turn in the bid, make sure that they've got forms pre-signed. If they're not authorized to sign for your company, make sure that your guy who's turning in your bid has got several copies of signed forms that are all original. So make 3 copies of it, sign them all. So in case he's filling out something and he gets it all filled out in ink, and then he's got to change something, you get a revised bid in that lowers your bid $5,000. Then he's not having to scratch stuff out and makes things messy where someone may not be able to read it. Now he's got 2 copies. That bid's no good. Put a big X through it. Let me write it down on this fresh copy. And now I can turn that in and it's all clear. It's a really good, just to cover yourself to make sure that you plan for those unexpected things. Because on bid day, we all know bid day there's something unexpected is going to happen. You're suddenly not going to have coverage on something. So you got to plan for those things. You got to plan that something's going to happen, and what am I going to do to mitigate that? And that's the key, really, for surviving bid day, because it's it's always an interesting thing. We have bid large projects before, and I mean, even as bidding as a on a concrete work, there's a lot of rebar guys who, they like to wait till the last minute, and suddenly it's 5 minutes before the bid, and I need a number. I gotta call to tell the guy who's running the project and turn it in the bid what the number is, so that he can sign it and get to wherever he needs to go to turn the bid in and get it turned in. And that I turned in a bid once, and there was no private place to inside the building where it needed to be turned in. So I was waiting outside. I found a parking spot, got some money, just kept plugging the meter. Had to go turn the bid in, go through a metal detector, run up 3 flights of stairs because there wasn't an elevator, and get it turned in. And you have to be aware of that. You got to make sure that your runner, whoever's turning that bid in, tells you those things. That they tell you how much time they need to get from the time you give them the number to, finish the bid form, seal the envelope, and then go get it turned in. Sometimes there's a nice private place, within 10 steps. Sometimes there's not that luxury. So you just have to be in communication with your guy to make sure that you know what the logistics are. Any other questions? Okay, with that. Oh, Dan's got something.
It's a good time to get some food, too. Before we break, there is a few comments as it related to Bluebeam, as well as BIM. And I just wanted to remind you that EIW has actually done some classes previously with the help of Hoffman. So if you go to EIW Contractor Development page, you'll actually see the introduction to Bluebeam as well as the introduction to BIM. Before we start with the next speakers, we're going to give those of you who haven't had enough opportunity to fill your plates to do so. And we want our speakers definitely to make sure they get something in them so they're fueled up and ready to go. But the next portion will be on MEP. Chris will introduce them and get them started, and then we'll finish with the program.